Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Lil Dudes Insect Academy podcast. I'm your host, Bradon Coy, and I'm so excited to be here with my new friend, Colleen. So, we're going to talk about bugs for a little bit with you all. So, welcome to the show, Colleen. Go ahead and introduce yourself for us. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. As you introduced, yeah, I'm Colleen, and I'm actually from the Philadelphia area, but now I live in northern Utah, and I study bees.
Awesome. Yeah. So we'll get into that in just a minute. But first let's go into like a little bit of your background. Where have you gone to school so far, and what were some of the things that you've done and worked on?
Yeah, so I went to high school in a little town called Haddonfield, New Jersey, and I went off to college for 4 years, like the traditional, timeline for a lot of people
Mm-hmm.
at the University of Rochester in upstate New York. And there I actually started with biomedical engineering. I've always been really interested in tinkering and figured that would be a lucrative and successful field. And then I sort of had like an aha moment where I was like, but wait, I love bugs. And I'm just continuously curious about learning about the systems of insects and evolution and working outside. And so I ended up switching to ecology and evolutionary biology. And that's when my whole mind got completely blown about bees.
That's awesome. Yeah, bees are so awesome. We've talked about them a lot on the show before. But yeah, jump into a little bit of that. What are you working on right now, and what gets you excited about that?
Yeah, so I ended up, getting a degree um, in like ecology and evolutionary biology. I didn't actually do a ton of research in undergrad, but I did assist a lot in like the curation of bees that
Mm,
were collected in
mm-hmm.
the Southwest by Robert Minkley, or I call him Bob, the bee man. And I ended up taking some time off from school after I got my degree and explored some opportunities. I moved out west and joined a lobbying firm in a different industry and explored the food service industry and actually did some outdoor education. And then finally was like, okay, I think I'm ready. I think I want to use my degree and actually chip away at all these questions I have regarding, native bees. And so I actually ended up literally like weeks before the pandemic, left my job at like a really nice restaurant, making
Mm,
some nice tips, and moved across the country with my old
wow.
car and started started working for the USDA, ARS, like Piru, which I think stands for Pollinating Insects Research Unit. I might be wrong on that.
Mm-hmm.
In Logan, Utah, under Terry Griswold. And that's when my mind even got blown even more about bees, which ultimately led me to becoming a graduate student at Utah State University and the bee lab with the USDA.
Nice.
So yeah, it's
That's
just
awesome.
kind of happened. Hmm.
Yeah. So okay. So you did your graduate. And then are you working on your PhD right now? Is that what's happening?
Yeah, yeah. So, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I'm in my this is now the beginning of my third year of
Okay.
my PhD at Utah State University.
Nice.
And yeah, it's really exciting and lots of big questions, lots of projects, lots of exciting research. And so I in particular work with these little bees that have always been mind-blowing to me. They're called fairy bees.
Mm,
But their genus name is Perdita, which I think I'm not exactly sure what it means in Latin.
mm-hmm.
I looked it up the other day, but I forgot. And they're the smallest bees in the world. They encompass a tiny, and they're only found in North America,
Wow.
in the Southwest. And they're actually the most species rich in North America. So there's like over 600 and like 20
Wow.
species. I know they're really tiny.
Mm-hmm.
They actually don't even sting. And they come in all colors. Really cool.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, what are you getting is your major in entomology, or, is it ecology, or what's your major in?
Yeah. So Utah State actually doesn't have a department of entomology, but
Yeah.
it has a biology department, which is what I'm in,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm also a student in the ecology center, which is sort of this umbrella. It's a center, so it incorporates a bunch of departments.
Mm,
Um, and it allows me to do really cool things. So like another interest of mine outside of like looking at bees is science reporting. And so that's
Mm,
something I do through the Ecology Center. And it's been an amazing opportunity because I get to connect with the scientific community that's around in Utah and talk about things that are really interesting and interview really, really cool scientists that do super awesome work.
nice. Yeah. So tell us a little bit more about that. How long have you been doing that, and like, who, like, what are some of your favorite things you've learned through that?
Yeah, it's been an amazing opportunity. So when I actually joined Utah State after living here and working for a few years, a really good friend of mine, Ashley Rohde, got me really involved in reporting. She kind of encouraged me to do it because she's like, it makes a little bit of extra money, but
Mm,
also it's an amazing opportunity to practice science communication,
yeah.
which is a thing that I think a lot of people tend to forget about or like
Absolutely.
not represent.
Overlook.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's just exactly, we've got all these amazing scientists that dedicate their lives
Mm,
to, conducting research, but a lot of it really doesn't get out. And
mm,
so being
yeah.
able to spread your passion and talk about your discoveries is super important. And then making it more approachable, I think, to people is definitely not intuitive. It's hard to strip away the jargon and then,
Mm,
keep everything as interesting for people.
right.
So I was really hesitant to actually start doing that because I had no experience. But after getting into it and getting involved and interviewing people and just thinking of stories that one of my first stories I did was about how the leaves change color in the fall. And so I was actually like, why do they change color? And so that was
Mm,
kind of fun too. You get to kind of explore your own questions
mm-hmm.
with experts, and then make them into stories and share them with the world. And so that's been great. And I think I would like to continue to do science communication throughout my career,
Mm,
wherever it ends up going,
yeah.
um, just because it is so important.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Yeah, I'm obviously passionate about that as well, so that's really awesome to hear. Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about your background. Where did you like originally? You talked about how you were learning about ecology and you were like, man, bees are really cool. But what about entomology? Like, were you always sort of into bugs, or was there a single moment that that happened, or how did you originally get into that?
Yeah, so I when you think of New Jersey, right, you think of suburbia
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and pizza and weird enraged Eagles fans
Oh
and
yeah.
things like that. Um, I am from there. So I as a kid, like turning over concrete slabs and looking under rocks was always a thing.
Mm,
My nickname was the bug girl
mm-hmm.
for forever. I don't know why. I can't really explain why. I just
Yeah.
think they're so cool. Anywhere you look on the ground, they're around. Um, and they really do dominate the world. They encompass, I think, like half of all terrestrial biomass,
Mm, yeah. Hmm.
excluding plants.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, yeah, those little buggers, they they determine a lot.
Oh
But
yeah.
I didn't know as a kid. I don't know. I mean, just they're creepy, they're crawly. You can throw them on your. You remember the little exoskeletons of with yeah, like of the locusts when they're on the trees
Mm,
and
yeah. Hmm.
yeah. So I was one of those kids that would like throw them on my shirt and run around or put them on the backs of people's shirts, which
Yep.
is not the kindest thing, but it is fun.
Hmm.
Especially doing it with my sisters who weren't as into bugs.
Yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah.
oh yeah, so I've always been, really interested in that and tinkering and tools and just a tomboy to the core. I
Hmm.
always wanted monster trucks and so I was always like really handsy outside digging
Hmm.
or playing around
That's
and
awesome.
yeah, I actually got a little discouraged with bugs when I got older.
Mm,
I just was like, oh, this isn't going to lead to anything.
mm.
Um, but I was very wrong.
Yeah. So I'm curious about that. When did you realize that it was actually an option for a career? Like, was there someone that told you that, or how did you find that out?
Yeah, so and I don't know if there was actually a definitive moment in my life where when I was little, I was like, oh, bugs are uncool. Like
Mm,
I need to shift my focus or whatever to seem I did move around a lot as a kid, and so I think that also kind of shakes people,
mm,
gives you an opportunity to start fresh and become a new and everyone who's growing up, like where your body is changing like crazy,
Mhm.
you're meeting new people and so I think I just kind of really didn't realize that for a long time, but
Mhm.
the definitive moment that really rekindled this passion for insects was actually my freshman year of college. I was really involved. I was really passionate about like sustainability. And so the U of R has this like eco reps program where
Mhm.
you're just like a representative on your floor of your freshman dorm hall and you can just like go around and promote sustainable living and stuff
Hmm.
like that. Um, and I did a presentation on bees and I met with a professor who ended up being, someone I worked for through undergrad. And I asked him about honeybees and he just blew my mind. He was like, "Oh, you shouldn't be asking about honeybees. You should be asking about like native
Yeah.
bees." They sort of just, I think a lot of people they think of either bumblebees that are really fuzzy and charismatic
Yeah.
and they kind of are clumsy on flowers. You think of honeybees that are like these loyal workers that, will risk their lives for their sisters and the
Mhm.
queen. Um, but that representative system is actually not it's pretty extreme when you think about
Yeah.
the grand scheme of bees.
Mhm.
Um, Most bees are solitary
Yeah.
or slightly social, where they kind of nest in the same areas, and they're their own queens. They emerge from usually the ground or a cavity, and they immediately start harvesting. And they usually mate once. Some mate more than once, and then they go and they start provisioning nests and their adult lifespan usually only lasts for like a few weeks to maybe a few months.
Mhm.
And then that cycle repeats itself. And so I just was mind blown. I was like, there's other bees. What are you talking about?
Mm.
And like,
Yeah.
so that just sparked more questions. I think that's a big thing in science and maybe like everything. You just,
Mhm.
how is that? How is that? And it just kind of snowballs into this whole career.
Right. Yeah, and I absolutely agree. I think the native solitary bees don't get as much love, and I don't really know why, because they are responsible for the majority of local pollination for sure. Um, and yeah, they don't produce honey or anything like that, but I think they're equally, if not more important, than, your social, um, social insects, and bees. So yeah, that's super awesome. So tell us a little bit more about your work with you said the fairy bee, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
yeah.
tell us a little bit
So
more about that.
yeah, these bees, as I said before, they're super diverse. They're really tiny. Um, they're probably one of the most understudied of all the native bees that we
Oh, that's
think
cool.
about, just
Hmm.
because, it's challenging. A lot of people don't even realize that they're bees or they're there because they're
Mm.
just little wispy things flying around. And
Mm-hmm.
um, so for me, I was just like, wow, I've one thing that's also really driven me to kind of like dive deeper into research has been this huge expansion in access to molecular data or like
Mm.
DNA and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the technological advances with everything is really kind of kicked off. I would
Mm.
say in like the early 2000s, that's kind of when things started to become a bit more affordable for sequencing, like
Right.
DNA and
Yep.
all that other good stuff that we think about that
Mm-hmm.
confuses people,
Mm-hmm.
including myself. Um, and so I was like, oh my gosh, like, there's this thing like we're expanding development in these really rare places across the West. There's a lot of funding going towards assessing pollinators. How are they responding to it? What's going on with their habitat? It's clearly
Mm-hmm.
being threatened, it's being
Mm-hmm.
disrupted, it's being destroyed. How is this affecting the bees? And in a lot of ways for me, like I think bees are cool. I'm going to be biased on that till I
Mm-hmm.
die.
Yeah.
Um, but they're also really because they are in the ground and they play around on flowers, they do all sorts of things. They're very deeply connected with a network of systems. The health of them is a strong indication of like the health of an ecosystem. And so in a lot
Right.
of ways, like I think they are the keystone species
Yeah.
naturally because they can indicate like, oh wow, okay, we've got lots of species here. Like I think things are doing well versus like 10 years down the road, you've
Right.
got neighborhoods all over and you're losing half of the biodiversity. And
Mm.
so this molecular data can access questions that aren't necessarily easy to answer
Mm,
or way more challenging to answer when you're
right.
just working with um, when you're not working with molecular data. And so I'm using those tools, those like super new tools
Mm-hmm.
to answer big questions about certain species. One in particular is called the Mojave poppy bee.
Okay.
Um, so she's a tiny little bee, I would say about the size of a grain of rice or a Rice Krispie.
Wow.
Eating some cereal and you get a little messy and there's a little rice. That's the size of this bee.
Wow.
Yeah, she was discovered in St. George, Utah by Terry Griswold, the person who actually recruited me to move here
Mm,
in like 1993. Um, and it's since been petitioned to be federally protected because of its habitat being disrupted.
mm,
Um, yeah, and so it's just so fascinating to me. We have a lot of them in the collection that are mounted and like curated and
right.
dead.
Mm-hmm.
And so part of the questions I have are really okay, like we have to decide whether this bee should be protected. And because I'm involved with the government, I get to speak with and think about and be in rooms that people that decide whether the species should be protected, have a drawing board. And so for me, I'm like, wow, like what can I contribute here with the molecular data? And so I'm curious about looking at its genetic diversity across its range,
Mm-hmm.
how isolated it is, how bad of a flyer it is,
Yeah.
to shed light and bring insight on how threatened it is.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, I'm trying not to throw in the jargon. um, but by all means, please chip away at it if it's not like clear enough.
No, yeah. Yeah, I think we're very straightforward.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like a really fascinating species, super interesting. Yeah, so like is so you were saying that they were really threatened, and is it because they're only native to a very small area of land, or like why is this such an issue?
Yeah, and so I'm gonna maybe take a step back
Mm-hmm.
and maybe say that like a lot of these bees that are native, especially the ones in the Southwest, tend to be like very highly like specialized.
Mm,
So they only go to a couple flowers or species of
right.
flowers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that increases their response to disruption because, their system is pretty restricted. Like if
Mm,
you go around, you like stomp all over the flowers or the plants, they're not going to be successful, and that's going to totally directly impact these really specialist bees.
right.
Um, but yeah, it's weird. Like we don't know why bees have evolved to be specialists. We don't know why bees have evolved to be generalists, but there's a lot of questions and drive to answer those questions right now, especially in that evolutionary bee world kind of community.
Mm-hmm.
But the cool thing is thinking of the desert, things are really rare and nutrition is kind of hard to come by. You've got plenty of light, but water is a huge it's scarce. And
Yeah.
so plants and other organisms like evolve these responses and defensive measures. And so a
Mm,
lot of plants like develop and create like toxins, maybe not toxins that are necessarily like directly poisonous to us,
mm-hmm.
but they could definitely disrupt or affect like the health or fitness of a bee that's like munching around on the pollen.
Mm, yeah.
So we think that maybe that could be why there's so many specialist bees. They pick a pattern like, okay, we're gonna just stick with this class of plant that has these kind of stinky chemicals, and
Mm-hmm.
we'll develop the mechanism to digest that or metabolize that. And so I think that might be why, but we don't know for sure. Um, and so for the answer of your question, um, that's kind of what makes it so scary is
Mm,
like, oh wow, this really rare plant that's only found here. Um, Another fancy word that we use a lot is endemic.
mm-hmm.
In the Mojave, I would say like most deserts and a lot of other ecosystems have a lot of endemism.
Mm-hmm.
um, that's sort of what it is. And the weird thing is like the soils of where this system exists is very like alkalinic.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're walking around, it's like sparkly. The ground is really sparkly
Hmm.
because it's full of gypsum. And you don't necessarily like think of gypsum, you're like, oh, what is that? Um, but it's used in mine to generate drywall.
Yeah.
Um, so if you're like listening and you knock on your wall, like that's made with gypsum. And
Hmm.
so um it's it's very, very like a lot of miners and mining companies want to come in and take and extract that. And
Hmm.
in doing so, I mean, you're tearing apart the ground. Like
Right.
there's no way. So,
Oh yeah.
so I think that's another reason is systems like this are under threat
Mm.
because of the extraction of things that could be used for humans.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. So that was a really roundabout way to answer
No,
your
it was
question.
great. Great overall outline of how all of that works. And it really reminds you of how connected everything is.
Yeah.
And like how involved every little part of everything is, because if you get rid of the flowers, you get rid of the bees, and vice versa. So like if you're going to save the bees, we need to take care of um our environment as well, and the vegetation. Yeah, and super everything is super connected. So super interesting and always cool to hear about. But yeah, so let's talk about your background a little bit. Let's get into that a little bit more. Like who along the way has sort of led you and like inspired you to do what you're doing? Like who's your biggest inspiration so far?
In life, I would definitely say my parents for
Mm.
sure. I think both of them have been given a lot of different circumstances for growth. You know, my dad has had a pretty good life, but
Mm-hmm.
he was a homicide prosecutor. He's retired now, but
Oh wow.
he's had, I know, very different than what I do.
Yeah.
But is a really hard worker, is very humble, and has been around some of the like darkest things with humans. And so I think he's been a
Mm.
really great person to go to for advice for career and just for character building and any kind of struggles that you have in life. And then my mom is she's a labor and delivery nurse and just total.
So the complete opposite. That is,
I know,
yeah.
yeah. It's silly. Just extremely nurturing, I would say. I would say that both of them definitely accepted who I was when I ran around with bugs in my hands.
Mm.
And they're just like, that's who she is. She's the bug girl,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Let her be, let her do her thing. And
Yeah.
my mom has always been so interested in nature. My dad was always encouraging us to like explore and wander around and go on big walks. And so I think that sort of environment really fostered me to just sort of explore a lot
Mm-hmm.
and discover this passion and curiosity for insects. Um, my mom's also like an Iron Man. She's a complete powerhouse.
Wow.
I know I don't
Yeah.
know if I've got that in me.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say for my career, there's been a number of people who have really inspired me. Um, and I think a lot of these people who are really well-renowned scientists in the bee world and they've described species or they've inspired people are the ones that are out in the field with their nets in the sunshine
Mm.
swiping the flowers and you know helping the next generation
Mm-hmm.
become inspired
Yeah.
by the system itself. And so when I'm under the microscope months later after curating these bees that we collect to identify and to use for molecular studies, we are not like we're looking at the features, we're mind blown by some of the things we see, but
Mm-hmm.
we're also, thinking about them. I'm like, what kind of behavior drives this feature? Like, how is that? And it's amazing what they
Mm-hmm.
do. They're an incredible system. I would say all of insects are for
Yeah.
sure. But again, I'm a bee person.
Yeah.
And so I think the people who have done that for me have been people like my undergrad um, mentor, Robert Minkley, and then also Terry Griswold for sure. He's a person of the land, to say the very least.
Mm.
he took me in out here in Logan and showed me the field, showed me the desert
Mm,
and the landscape, and just showed me how to find bees.
yeah.
Um, and I think it's pretty intuitive, but my gosh, they're everywhere. You can find them boring into the wood. You can look at the ground and find parasitic bees. You can
Mm,
look at the tiniest flowers that wouldn't even constitute as flowers to the naked eye, and
yeah.
you'd find some of the rarest bees in the world. Like, just he always says bees are where you find them, and um, he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So never stop looking in the weirdest places because you might find a bee or a new species of insect. I think that actually happened quite a bit during COVID.
Mm,
People were in lockdown.
mm-hmm.
They just like went in their backyard, and entomologists like discovered a ton of species of their systems.
Yeah.
And so it just goes to show like they really are everywhere.
Yeah.
And you should never stop looking.
Yeah. That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, so sort of like in your spare time, what are some other interests and hobbies that you enjoy, whether related or not to science and entomology in general?
Yeah, I really enjoy taking in where I'm at. So I'm like in Logan, Utah, which is in a valley called Cache Valley, and it's surrounded by mountains.
Mm.
So I'm very spoiled to say that like recreation, outdoor recreation is like truly at my
Oh
fingertips.
yeah.
And so I like to indulge in that as much as possible. But I particularly really like to bike. I've recently gotten to mountain biking with some friends, but I'm a road biker. I love to road bike. I would say it's not necessarily like type 2 fun, but it's food
Mm-hmm.
never tastes better after a really long bike
Oh
ride.
yeah, I bet.
So that's definitely a part of it. And I used to rock climb a lot, but I haven't had the time very much. But I really enjoy going up and skiing. And so this weekend I'm gonna go skiing,
Nice.
which is something I've been really hesitant to do, but it's so much fun to
Mm.
go with friends and find your community.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I enjoy like the music scene, the local music in Utah,
Okay.
and just exploring the community.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, those are some. I also just really enjoy getting involved with like social gatherings and doing a lot of reporting.
Mm. Yeah, that's awesome. I love that. Yeah, so what are your big plans for the future? Like, after you're done with your PhD, what's ahead of you? Like, any trips or research that you want to do, or what are your big plans?
Yeah, I would really like to become a scientist.
Hmm.
Um, and so whether that means working for the federal government or working at an institution, I'm not entirely sure. I think I'm leaning more towards federal government, because it's nice and I really enjoy having the focal lens of conservation being like the core.
Mm,
And
yeah,
so it would be wonderful to work for an agency like U.S. Fish and Wildlife and be like a pollinator entomologist,
yeah,
or being able to like use molecular data to look into that and answer questions about like, okay, let's try and assess like whether the species should be federally protected or what's the health of it. Or so those are really like what drives me is like,
hmm,
how is this really going to matter for the system? We're
mm,
spending thousands or a lot of money. We're going out, we're sampling, we're killing bees. Like, they should be honored in this, and we should use their DNA to answer these big questions to see
hmm,
how they're doing. So
absolutely.
for me, that's my future. I think that's part of it too. I think it's good to have big plans, and
Hmm.
I'm still finding those out, but that's kind of where I would really envision being.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, so right before we wrap it up here, Colleen, where can we go to like learn more about what you working on? If you have social media or website, like where can we go to learn more about you?
Yeah, so as a reporter, I have a radio station website. It's a NPR affiliated station called Utah Public Radio,
Okay.
and I'm on that. And so yeah, most of my work has been science, and
Hmm.
this year has been pretty busy for me in terms of the research. And so I haven't been reporting as often, and I've been but I this past year in 2023, I was actually allowed to travel to Panama to do some reporting.
That's awesome.
I know it.
Yeah.
I'm really very lucky to be involved in this, and so I just published those two very big stories, which took a lot of time, and so
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping to be able to report more frequently now after those have finally been out the door. Um, but that's a great way to listen and also get even more mind blown by science, especially local science that's happening at Utah.
Yeah.
Um, and I do have a social media, but I'm not as active on it because I like to report more.
Yeah.
And I don't have a website right now, but I intend to have one soon.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, but if you are inclined to go on Instagram um, and to explore, I would really encourage you to follow the bees in your backyard. Um, he's also a big mentor for me, Joe Wilson. It's also a book that's been highly publicized about native bees with Joe Wilson and also with Olivia Carroll Messenger, who are two great people that work very closely with Terry for a long time.
Hmm.
And so they're successors of him
Yeah.
and are also inspirations for me, but have awesome coverage about bees and what it's like to be a scientist. And so I would highly encourage people to follow the bees in your backyard.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I'll have to check out that book. I'd never heard of it, so that sounds really awesome. Yeah, so cool. Thank you so much for being on the show. Yeah,
Thank you.
you were totally natural and super fun to get to know you on the show. So yeah, thanks again for being on the show. This was super fun.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for being so flexible. I know we've been trying to do it since since NSOC,
Oh
so
yeah,
it's like yeah, it's crazy. But I hope you had a great holiday and this year is kicking off. And thanks so much for allowing me to talk about this stuff. Really cool.
of course. This was really fun, and you're doing important research.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think you're doing an amazing, job too. You're talking about all kinds of things
Mm-hmm.
and all kinds of things related to bugs and insects and little dudes and
Mm-hmm.
so I've actually learned a lot being a listener. So
Oh, that's awesome. I love
keep
to hear that.
going, keep doing it. It's cool.
Yeah, thank you.